Every story has a before, a moment when everything still looks normal on the surface, when people smile for photos, when the house feels warm, when love feels real, before fear creeps in, before someone starts to disappear long before their body goes missing, before the silence becomes a final witness. Christel Krug once lived in that before. A wife, a mother, someone who believed in loyalty, in family, in marriage. That marriage meant safety. That love protected you. She had no idea that the person she trusted most would eventually become the one she feared. And she had no way of knowing that one day, people would speak her name not in conversation, but in past tense, because the danger she thought was outside her home was already sleeping under the same roof. She just didn't see it yet. Or maybe she did, because according to people close to her, something shifted months before everything went dark. Her tone changed, her posture, her eyes, the way she spoke about her life. She stopped sounding secure. She started sounding careful, like someone measuring every word, someone who knew they were not safe. Before her death, 47-year-old Christel Krug believed she was being stalked. She confided in friends. She told her family. She even sought help. And the messages she received weren't random spam. They felt personal, invasive, almost intimate. Someone knew where she worked. Someone knew the route she drove. Someone knew her routines. And the threat kept escalating. Whoever this person was, they wanted her terrified. But when investigators finally uncovered the truth, the stalker wasn't a stranger. It wasn't her past coming back. It wasn't even someone on the outside. The person tormenting her, the person sending those messages, the person creating the fear that swallowed her life, was living inside her house. Beat of silence. This is the case of Christel Krug, a Colorado mother whose last months were defined by confusion, fear, and relentless psychological terror. A case where the digital fingerprints didn't point outward, but straight back to the man she trusted most. Her husband. Christel wasn't someone who lived on the edge of chaos. She lived in Anthem, a suburban neighborhood in Broomfield, Colorado, an area known for quiet streets, scheduled sprinkler systems, and neighbors who wave when walking dogs. Friends describe her as warm, steady, practical, and protective. She worked, raised her children, and built a life she believed was stable. To the outside world, her marriage to Daniel Krug looked ordinary, even successful. He worked in tech and had a reputation as someone structured, intelligent, and private. They had a home, careers, routines. Everything looked normal. But normal was an illusion, because in the final months of her life, something shifted. Christel began receiving messages, anonymous, aggressive, and disturbing. Emails from burner accounts, threats, warnings. Some even reference a relationship from her past, implying someone old, someone unresolved, someone watching. To those around her, it seemed like a targeted campaign of harassment. Someone wanted control. Someone wanted fear. Someone wanted her isolated. And slowly they succeeded. The threats didn't stop, they multiplied. Christel reported feeling watched. She changed routines, avoided going out at night, and repeatedly checked her surroundings. The digital trail appeared sophisticated. Multiple accounts, different platforms, disguised IP addresses. It seemed strategic, calculated, designed to push her to emotional exhaustion. At one point, authorities later confirmed, the stalking became so constant that it altered how she lived. This wasn't random cyber harassment. This was personal. And whoever was behind it was willing to escalate. On the morning of December 14th, authorities received a call. Christel was found unresponsive in her garage, and later pronounced dead. To the outside world, it looked sudden, but to investigators, nothing about the scene felt accidental. Security systems in the home, systems that normally captured everything, were suddenly disabled or tampered with. A doorbell camera had been taped over. Other surveillance devices displayed suspicious gaps. There were no signs of forced entry, no unknown fingerprints, no evidence of an intruder escaping the property. The house wasn't broken into. Nothing was taken. Nothing added up. And so, investigators widened the search. Modern homicide investigations don't start with the body. They start with data. Detectives obtain warrants, emails, phone records, social media accounts, location pings, network activity. And what they uncovered shifted the entire case. IP logs showed the threatening messages weren't coming from outside the state, or even outside the home. Multiple messages traced back to devices and networks associated with Daniel Krug. To investigators, this wasn't just a clue. It was a fracture line, and everything after that point split open. Because the threats, the stalking, the digital torment Kristen endured came from the same house where she slept, ate, and believed she was safe. It wasn't an outsider manipulating her life. It was her husband. Investigators discovered that many of the messages were written in a style that mimicked someone from her past, a former romantic relationship. It created an illusion, a jealous ex, a threat resurfacing after years, a ghost revisiting the living. But the forensic trail told a different story. Files had metadata linking them to Daniel. Accounts were created with phone numbers associated with him. Logins originated from his workplace and his home. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't emotional. This was planned. And while his wife lived in fear, friends later described Daniel as calm, controlled, and outwardly normal. A man living a double script, one in public, one in secret. Once the evidence converged, Daniel Krug was arrested and charged. Weeks of testimony followed. The prosecution argued that the stalking campaign was intentional psychological warfare designed to manipulate, isolate, and ultimately silence Christil. They presented digital forensics, IP traces, device logs, message timing, account creation history. They showed physical tampering with home surveillance systems. They presented timelines where only one person had the access, motive, and proximity required to orchestrate the stalking. And eventually, the jury reached a decision. Daniel Krug was found guilty of first-degree murder, as well as multiple charges related to stalking and criminal impersonation. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus additional consecutive time. But for those close to Christil, justice did not erase the questions. Why? Why construct a stalker instead of confronting her? Why choose manipulation, fear, surveillance? Instead of honesty, why destroy a life and a family? To maintain control. There are answers on record, but none that satisfy the human part of the question. In the final months of her life, Christil believed she was being hunted. She was right, not by a stranger, not by a shadow from her past, but by someone who sat beside her at dinner, someone who shared her home, someone who knew her fears because he created them. In the end, the most terrifying monster was one she had already trusted. After Christil Krug's death, the police had one question. Was this a tragic coincidence, or something carefully engineered? At first glance, nothing about the scene screamed homicide. There were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no attacker fleeing. Everything appeared quiet, ordinary, domestic, but detectives had learned one rule in cases like this. Not every crime leaves fingerprints. Some leave patterns. And in Christil's death, the pattern began with fear. The first red flag. While processing the home, investigators noticed something subtle, the type of detail that only stands out if you know where to look. Multiple security devices around the property, cameras, motion sensors, and digital access logs were disabled, covered, or offline. Not broken, not removed, manually silenced. To police, this wasn't random. Security systems fail, but they don't conveniently fail all at once, and not on the exact day something goes wrong. Someone had taken control. Someone had ensured there would be no recording, no digital witness. And that decision raised an uncomfortable possibility. This wasn't the work of an intruder trying to avoid being seen. This was someone who knew where every camera was, and exactly how to shut them down. Detectives turned to threats Christil received in the months before her death. The emails were hostile, targeted, personal. They referenced her life, her routines, her past. They were meant to intimidate. But what stood out most was structure. Each email was sent from carefully created accounts, throwaway addresses, temporary usernames, masked senders. To an untrained eye, it looked like the work of a stalker hiding in the digital shadows. But to cybercrime analysts, the pattern was familiar. Someone wasn't just sending threats. Someone was building a false identity, a phantom antagonist, a ghost with no face, only fear. Detectives requested warrants for email metadata, IP logs, router access records, device IDs, Wi-Fi usage patterns, location timestamps. Once the data arrived, the illusion fractured. The anonymous messages didn't point to unknown devices. They pointed home. Many messages had been sent while Crystal and her husband were both inside the house, sometimes even in the same room. One message was sent at a time when only one device was active on the home network. A laptop later confirmed to belong to Daniel Krug. It wasn't a mistake. It was a timeline, a map of intention. Detectives began to reconstruct the harassment step by step. Each account creation, each login attempt, each message sent. And again, the trail led back to Daniel. Even when he used tools to disguise his location, VPNs, temporary browsing environments, or anonymizing platforms, the forensic team found traces. A cache session here, a browser fingerprint there, a small, overlooked sync between devices. Every digital action leaves a shadow, and those shadows while detectives examined devices. A second part of the investigation began, understanding why. Friends told investigators the same thing. Crystal had seemed afraid, but more than that, confused. She struggled to understand who was stalking her or why they cared. None of it made sense. One friend described her voice on the phone as a mix of fear and disbelief, like she knew something was wrong, but she couldn't explain it. To forensic psychologists, that reaction matched a pattern. Coercive control, a form of psychological manipulation where fear is used not to injure, but to dominate. In such cases, the abuser creates a threat, plays a protector, controls the narrative, becomes the only source of safety. The goal isn't chaos. The goal is dependency. And slowly, Crystal had been isolated, emotionally, mentally, digitally. She believed she was being hunted by an outsider, but the threat was already inside her life. Step by calculated step, old the truth. By now, investigators suspected the harassment and death were connected. They reviewed Daniel's statements. What stood out wasn't what he said, but what didn't match. His timeline had gaps. His explanations contradicted digital records. His behavior the day of Crystal's death didn't align with normal response patterns. Detectives noted he was calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. Not the reaction of a spouse blindsided by tragedy, more like someone waiting for the next step. The final red flag came from something small, almost insignificant. A device belonging to Daniel had been placed in airplane mode for a specific window of time, precisely overlapping the period when messages were sent from a masked digital identity. It was the mistake detectives needed. The illusion finally collapsed. Authorities waited until every digital thread was verified. Then, with enough evidence to support charges, they moved. Daniel Krug was arrested on suspicion of murder and stalking, along with related cybercrime offenses. News of the arrest stunned the community. To neighbors, he wasn't a violent man. He wasn't loud. He wasn't erratic. He was described as quiet, intelligent, private, controlled, someone who blended into daily life, someone no one suspected. But investigators had uncovered a different truth. The stalking wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't emotional unraveling. It was a constructed psychological campaign, planned and executed over time.